All right, so I just want to welcome you to the Accidental Artist, the free online event. And today we have Blair here, and I'm just really excited. And you're from Seattle, Washington, is that right?
Yes, I'm in Seattle, Washington now. I'm originally from North Carolina, but I
Oh,
live here now.
great. Well, great. Well, first, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. So I am primarily a quilt maker, and I've been making quilts for about 15 years. I've dabbled in a lot of other types of things, and I do a lot of projects using recycled materials, and those projects are usually things that we decorate our home with. And so that led to my book, which I wrote and was published in 2014, spring. It's about a year ago, and it's called Wisecraft: Turning Thrift Store Finds, Fabric Scraps, and Natural Objects into Stuff You Love. So there are quilts in that one, but that is a little bit of everything, which is kind of the way I express my creativity through knitting, through painting, crochet, quilt making, um, all kinds of things. And so these days, usually I am quilt making. I just finished filming a series of classes for the online site Creative Live using all kinds of upcycled materials. And I'm about to, hopefully, in the next couple weeks, jump into writing a new book that's going to be all about upcycled materials in quilt making. So that's kind of in a nutshell what I do.
That's really exciting. Do you love the book writing process?
I do. It's different for everybody, but what I love about it is I don't know. Your schedule is sort of laid out months in advance, so you see all. I'm really motivated by deadlines, so my deadlines are all laid out nice and neat, so I can, I kind of see what's coming, and uh, writing a book sometimes requires a lot of research, and because I love what I write about so much, I really enjoy researching, going deep in different techniques and things like that. So that I'm looking forward to just really geeking out on all of the research involved in writing this new book. But it's fun.
That's so cool. Well, thank you so much. I know you have a busy schedule, so thank you for taking time to kind of spread the word that art can enrich everyone, even if you're not an artist. So thank you for that.
Yes.
Especially with your upcycling. Can you talk a little bit about that, kind of what you mean by that?
So I started doing this sort of crafting way back when my daughter my two children, who are now 13 and 16, when they were younger. But my husband and I both come from a design background. I actually worked in the apparel industry. He works in brand consulting. And so we have a design sense, but we didn't have loads of money to spend on things to decorate our home with. So we knew we had, creative ideas. And so we just started by, what can we find at the thrift store, or wouldn't this be interesting to reuse as this? And so a lot of the things around our home come from thrift store, anything really. I mean, furniture, and we do buy new things too, but we almost find it's more interesting to take something that's older, that has a little bit of soul already, in it, and just add to it. I just finished making like a statement chair over the weekend that'll be on the Etsy blog soon, that I actually wrapped the entire thing with yarn. It was really fun, and it's just, it was a $6 chair. What I love about that is that you can take any kind of material from the thrift store and play with it, feel like you can just really experiment, because your investment as far as the dollars is really low. If it didn't work out, it's a $6 chair. I can let that one go. But I think it gives me a lot of creative freedom that way. And then in my quilt making, the upcycled materials that I use, I enjoy finding things that are unexpected as far as color to combine them together. And usually I will shop for thrift store clothes or upcycle clothes that maybe my kids have outgrown. And I will design a new quilt and sort of give myself parameters of color. Like, okay, we're going to stick within this weird, like purple eggplant color palette. We're not going to move from it. So I find that, there's a lot of beautiful fabric out there that's for sale right now, but I find it's really fun to just use what you have and see where it goes. And so I think that one of the things that people like about my quilts is that the quirky color palettes that come out of them. Because what's funny is that I wear black most of the time in my real life, but my quilt's kind of vomit color, which happily vomit color, but there's a lot of color in what I do. And I think it's because I just find these unexpected fun combinations in thrift store, what I can find in a thrift store.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. Whenever you said that about the yarn, it reminded me, I think it was 20 years ago probably. I remember creating an old lamp I had found and put yarn all around it to make the shade. And so I had forgotten all about that. And then when you said that.
Yeah, it's the same sort of idea. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really fun. Okay, so would you say, I know quilting's, a big part of your life. Would you say that's one of your favorite things to do in the art world?
It is. It's one of my favorite things. I paint a little bit, but as you can imagine in my studio, painting and playing with fabric don't mix very well together if I'm trying to keep them separated. So I haven't painted that much this year, but I've done a series, and they're on my website, a series of quilt-inspired paintings where I actually paint, I sort of replicate the fabric and do these traditional quilt blocks in these quirky colors. So I do enjoy that, and my first love is quilt making, but quilt making is a process, and it requires a lot of steps, and it requires a lot of time. And so the other side of my creativity is doing these DIY projects that I provide content to other websites, and those are just like down and dirty, really fun and fast. So that sort of satisfies like the instant gratification side to be creative, and still having the quilt making methodical, creative, long-term process on the other side too. So I get both.
Right. Yeah, that's important, I'm sure. Because the quilts, I'm sure, take a long time, so you want to see some results quicker.
Yes, exactly. So that's why I love the DIY thing, and I also love to keep busy in the evening when we watch movies. I like to crochet and to knit and do things like that too. So, there's really not a creative outlet that I won't try at least once. I haven't woven a basket, but I'm not opposed to it. So who knows? But yeah.
Well, that's okay. My great-grandparents were all basket weavers, and I still have not tried it. So it's all right.
It looks beautiful, but I don't know if I could do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so do you have a favorite book or a favorite quote you want to share with our viewers?
So my favorite quote is one that I grew up with. It's called, and it just, I don't know who said it, but it's "Don't borrow trouble." And it be translated to any situation. I tell it to my 16-year-old all the time. Don't borrow trouble. Just, and it really, if I really stop and think about what that means, working for myself in a creative business, it helps me remember to just not take too much on within one little window of time, and just to kind of keep things compartmentalized, worry about that later. It's not really a procrastination thing. It's just the worry's not going to solve it right now, so we can worry later and solve it. So that's my favorite quote. And as far as books, I have a lot of favorite books. I have a collection of like home decor books. Those really inspire me. My absolute favorite quilt maker of all time, Denise Schmidt, has two books that I love very much. And I also love vintage books about crafting and quilt making. So I'm always looking on eBay or Etsy or even at the thrift store for vintage books. I find those are just super inspiring.
That's awesome. Yeah, so do you have somebody like in particular that inspires you, or do you mainly go to those books for inspiration?
When I am working on a new quilt, a lot of times I don't look at quilt books at all. I think it's so easy to go like down the rabbit hole of Pinterest or your favorite books and get influenced by those types of designs and things like that. And I try not to be. When I was writing my first book, I did not look, I tried to just retreat from being online for inspiration. It was just, it's too easy to just get, I want my style to be my own. Mm-hmm. So, but then there's also times when I'm stuck and I will pull out a book and just, or I will go to downtown Seattle and just window shop and I'll take anthropology windows. It's like just something that just feels inspiring and feels, it's not that it influences my style. It just gets my creative thoughts sort of going into a new direction. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I need that. I mean, I work in a basement studio, so it's, it's very easy to just kind of get in my own little world. So I have to balance it. But yeah, those are where I go for inspiration. It's, Denise Schmidt, again, she's sort of somebody that I've looked up to for years, but I don't look to her so much for inspiration creatively as much as just her, I don't know how I would say it, like creative ethic or something like that, just how she approaches her design process. People like that really inspire me more so than the actual work, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Because, I mean, they all have their own process too. So I'm sure it kind of helps to see how they have their take on things. And then you can kind of not mimic, but, draw inspiration from that.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's good. Well, and I know when we talked on the phone, this was so cool. And could you talk to them about kind of what you told me on the phone about the first quilt you made and what that was about?
Yes.
I love this story.
So it's sort of, I think that my daughter was a toddler and I was expecting her little brother. And because my husband and I both worked in the fashion industry, she had these really lovely baby clothes that she'd outgrown, and I wanted to somehow preserve them. They were in a box, and I got this idea that I was going to make a quilt. I'd never made a quilt before. I did not know how to make a quilt before that day, and there was no, 15 years ago, 16 years ago, there was no just Google it. And so, I just had to figure it out. So I didn't know anything about consistent seam allowances and things like that. So I just knew, okay, let's cut all of this into squares and piece the squares together. Mm-hmm. And that is how I made her first quilt. It's super wonky. It's there's a lot of inconsistencies, and what's really funny is that I didn't know how to attach the layers of the quilt together. So you've got the backing, the batting, and the top. I didn't know, okay, these won't just hold together if I add something around the outside to bind them all together. I have to actually get these to hold together throughout the quilt. So then I figured out I could just tie them in the corners with yarn. So, which is what I did. I just tied little knots with yarn. And the funny part is that the yarn ties end about 3/4 of the way down the quilt. There's no more ties because that's when I had her little brother. So, 16 years later, nobody notices that anymore. And it just, over the years, that quilt was used and loved and talked about and shared with family, I realized the importance of storytelling with quilts and how it can really create a family story that can be shared with others. And it's a warm, physically and psychologically, it's a very warm way to express memories or preserve memories. And really, that quilt started my love of using clothing and quilts. I mean, since that first one, I've made quilts from their old jeans. I've made quilts from old corduroy clothing. I've made quilts from ski jackets. And I love that there is, as I said before, that the garment comes to you with a history. And when I use jeans, I love to use the parts that are worn or maybe mended or something like that. But that first baby quilt really started that whole journey. So I have her to thank for having all those cute clothes.
Yeah, it totally morphed your life into this.
It did.
Yeah, I love that story. I was going through some old clothes of my daughter. She's 8 now. And and I wish I would have done that, like saved the stuff. I always passed it on to somebody else, but it would have been neat to kind of see those different clothes as she grew up and just have those memories of her being in them.
Yeah, and it's fun because I took pieces of the curtains and put them in there and, pieces of the fabric and the crib bumpers and things like that. So it tells the story of what her room colors were. And it was just such a special time for us. She was our first kid. We were over planners. We had the complete decor of her room totally figured out, before my first trimester was over. And so, yeah, it sort of helps tell that story to her.
Yeah. Well, and I know as she gets older and older too, she'll just really appreciate it.
Yes, I hope so. That's the plan anyway. It's a very happy, bright quilt, and she likes black. Black dresses, and so right now it doesn't work with her color scheme, but I think she will appreciate it one day.
Yeah, you'll have to wait till she's a little older before you can give it to her. So Blair, do you believe that anyone can use art to enrich their life?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is why I write the books that I write. It's because when I lecture or when I teach a class and people say, or even just in normal day-to-day life, and people say, I wish I had the patience to do that, or I wish I could do that, but I don't know how, or I could never do that because my hands don't work that way, or something like that. And I'm always really quick to say, I have no patience. I don't have any patience. But there is something about the whole creative process, and it could be any creative outlet that I do, that requires me mentally to slow down and to really I can't multitask when I'm making something, anything. And I think that that's so meditative and so important because we're so busy. And so I tell people who don't feel like they're creative in any way, just try it. And if that doesn't feel right, let's try something different, because I think everybody's capable of finding something to put themselves in that really calming, crafting. And I think that a lot of people just immediately assume that they can't do it, which is a shame. So when I write my books, I write them towards, you can do this and you can do it in an afternoon, or you can do this without having to go deep in technique and create something beautiful. So I believe anybody can do it.
So what step would you give them? You know, I know your books are really informative and stuff like that, but if, you know, you could tell somebody one step kind of to start that creative process, what would you tell them?
Well, so one of the things that I started doing, because I am not, I'm not a sketcher. And I don't, but I love the idea of sketchbooks.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually tried or started a blog several years ago with my family members who are, I have a very creative family, and we all live in different areas. And so I started this blog in hopes that we would all post a sketch a day, just something. And in the beginning, and the whole, really for selfish reasons, I started it because I don't sketch. And I thought I'm going to challenge myself to just sketch. And in the beginning, they were really awful. And because I was trying to do these realistic sketches, and I was giving myself these parameters of it has to be 30 minutes and no longer, and you can't do it all day or you'll lose interest. And I started to realize that for me, doodling was actually, it didn't feel like a creative outlet, but yet it was. And so I started these really, and I don't share them on the blog anymore, but I doodle intentionally. So I have intention, and I, you know, now my parameter is I fill up the page, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but it's almost like Zen-tangling, I guess. It's very meditative. So I would tell somebody, if they don't think they're creative, I would tell them to either do something like that, because I think that is it's such a fun habit. It's just a satisfying habit to get into, to fill a sketchbook. And it could be, if they don't feel like they want to fill the entire page with Zen-tangling or doodling or drawing, cut, you know, collage it together or draw around the collage image. And then the other thing that I think is really fun to do if you want to sew is to throw a bunch of scrap fabrics in a paper bag or something that you can't see, and just pull from them and sew them together and just start piecing things and see what happens. Just see what evolves. And I've done this in workshops that I've taken, and there's something about, in both of those instances, where it's like, I think that people who don't feel creative feel compelled to, at their first attempt of being creative, to follow a recipe sort of thing. And so they feel like they need to be told what to do. And so I think that things like Zen-tangling or doodling or collaging or just grabbing and sewing without thinking sort of makes them realize, it sort of breaks down that, oh, I don't need a recipe. I can just, this is art. This is being creative. And I think it's important to break down that mental idea that are their traditional definition of what art is. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yes, yeah. And I think it takes away the scary factor. You know,
Yeah.
they're afraid to fail. And I think, you know, half of art is failing and trying it again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's been so many days when I worked on a new idea for an entire day that didn't work out. It just flat out did not work out. But unless it's really awful, I never throw it away. If it's, you know, a series of quilt blocks, I will put them in a bag and maybe put them away. But I always try to revisit them later on, because I think that it's important to know when to walk away and just say, you know what, this isn't working. And I think it's important to know when, okay, this is not feeling right, but I think I could make it into something that feels right and stick with it a little longer.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's important too, sometimes when you do have that mistake, you know, I've done paintings sometimes and I'm like, oh, that was a complete bust, you know, to kind of just take it as a learning experience, put it aside and know that, you know, kind of not let that energy be sucked from you held on to that. So that's good.
And remember that we learned from every part of the process. If I had not done those silly little sketches early in that sketchbook exercise my family and I were doing together, I probably wouldn't have figured out that the doodling part is the part that I find satisfying and the part that actually helps me in my work as a quilt maker.
Yeah, well said. That's great. Well, so we're coming to a close. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to share, Blair? Anything that maybe you didn't say that you wanted to kind of say?
Well, I will say I can't wait to see all these interviews. That I will say that. I'm really excited because some of the people that you're interviewing are some that I'm really, really inspired by. So it's going to be fun. But I would say to anybody that is watching these and just ready to take a creative leap in some way, it's just so important, I think, to just find out. I think people are really missing something when they're not actively at some point in their life trying to figure out what really makes their heart sing creatively. And it could be anything. It could be literal. It could be basket weaving. It could be anything. But I think that in our world right now, we're so online and we're so tuned in all of the time. And I have grown over the years to appreciate the time that I am focused on being creative, even if it's just for 30 minutes or if it's for a whole day. I've grown to really cherish that focused time. I think it makes me a better person. I think it relieves my stress in ways that I can't relieve any other way. And yeah, so my biggest advice is listen to the interviews, but then turn off your computer and get creative.
Yeah, you got to listen to the interviews first.
Right.
Well, thank you so much for being here. It's been a pleasure. And I appreciate all your work and your books that you're writing just to kind of help people with this process. So I appreciate it. And thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.